Welcome to New Testament Chronology with Gary Fox, a teaching podcast of Christ is King Ministries. For more information about Christ is King Ministries or to inquire about Gary's preaching or speaking availability, please visit www.christiskingministries.com.
When I'm done recording this broadcast this week on New Testament Chronology, I am going to spend some time editing the sound quality as best as I can. Of course, I'm not a professional sound tech, but I can mess around enough to where it's halfway decent, the sound quality. So I'm gonna edit that with some of the software that I have. Then I'm going to upload it to the provider. Libsyn is what I use to upload my podcast, and it then distributes it to the various podcasting providers: iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, pretty much everywhere that you can catch a podcast, you can catch New Testament Chronology. So once I get that thing uploaded, I am going to schedule it to release. The New Testament Chronology is always scheduled to be released on Sundays at 6 a.m. That way, whenever you wake up on Sunday, as you're getting ready for church, many people like to get their minds right as they're heading and getting themselves set for church that week and listen to the broadcast. Others, of course, listen at other times throughout the week. So once I get that thing scheduled, I am then going to lock up here at my office, and I'm going to drive to Taco Bell. And I'm going to go through the drive-thru at Taco Bell, and I am going to order one of those, what do they call them? They're on the Cantina menu. I think it's like a Chipotle steak burrito. And these things are sweet. They're very good, and they're halfway healthy. They've got steak in them, and there's some black beans in them, and some other good stuff. I think some rice is in it and whatnot. And it also comes with a handful of chips and a small little cup of guacamole. And so I can really justify the chips by having the guacamole. And so I'm gonna order that, and then I'm gonna order a Diet Mountain Dew. Now, of course, some of you already know that probably that diet stuff is not the best option, but I don't need the sugar, and sugar upsets my stomach and so forth. And so instead of getting water, I'm going to get a Diet Mountain Dew. And then I'm going to drive home and probably try to drive and eat some of those chips while I'm driving and sip on my Diet Mountain Dew. I'm going to get home, and I am going to get ready to go out on a date. I'm going to take her out somewhere. I'm probably going to take her to get maybe some sushi or something she really likes. And we'll have the babysitter come over. And then the babysitter is actually my niece. And so once I get home, I'll drop off my wife, and she'll run in the house. She'll get my niece and send her back out. Then I'll drive my niece home, and then I'll come home, and we'll probably watch a movie or something, or watch something on the TV before bed. Now, that's what I plan on doing. Those are my plans. It would be tremendously presumptuous of me if I were to think that somehow I am able to determine exactly how my life is going to go, even as I am doing this podcast, and what I'm going to do after I'm done uploading this podcast. If you listen to what I just said, though, each and every one of those statements are in the affirmative. I'm going to go to Taco Bell when I'm done with this podcast. I'm taking my wife out on a date tonight. I think I'm going to take her and we're going to have sushi. All of these things I am saying very presumptuously. I'm saying them as if I know for a fact how things are going to go. All of us talk like that. Here's the question: how many of us actually think like that? It is one thing in common vernacular to talk about what we're planning on doing and what we think we're going to do, and to even phrase things as if we are sure of how it's going to go. I'm going to Taco Bell when I'm done with this podcast. That is, of course, unless during this podcast, I don't kill over and have a heart attack. That is, unless on the way to Taco Bell, somebody doesn't broadside me and total my vehicle and put me in the hospital. I'm going to go to Taco Bell so long as when I get there, I don't see that building in flames because it somehow accidentally caught on fire. You can see how when you really stop and think about it, we do not know the future. We can make all the plans that we want. We can try to map out and organize our week, schedule things, and think about how things can go and should go and probably will go. But it is an entirely different thing to be so dead set on our way and thinking that we control our own destiny. There comes a point where we get so presumptuous about what we're doing that we absolutely can leave God out of the equation. We can attempt to live our life as if we are sovereign. And that, my friends, the Apostle James declares in no uncertain terms is very, very sinful. It is very short-sighted and it is very foolish. This week on New Testament chronology, we are going to be talking about arrogant boasting and presumptuousness that is very sinful, very foolish, and is something that we as Christians must ever be mindful to avoid. All right, let's take a quick break here so I can let you know how you can follow Christ is King Ministries on social media. We maintain a very active social media presence, which we hope will be a blessing to you each and every day. Simply search for the handle Christ is King M. That is Christ is King M on either Facebook or Twitter. And for my personal social media content, simply follow the handle Gary Owen Fox on either Facebook or Twitter. Now, for those of you into this whole Instagram thing, we're there as well. Simply search for Christ _is _King _ministries. In our study in the book of James, we have found ourselves at the very last subsection in James chapter 4. We're going to begin this broadcast by reading James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. Beginning in verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Verse 17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Let's pray. Father, we do again come before you with humble hearts, wanting to recognize you in every area of our life. And as we come to know you more, and as we come to know you in truth, we recognize your sovereign rule over all things at all times. Your sovereignty and your sight and foresight extends even to future events. We don't know what holds the future, but you do. We cannot trust, therefore, in our own understanding. Our own understanding is to say it is limited is a gross understatement. We have no ability or possibility of being able to navigate our way through life because we do not know what the very next step holds. So we turn to you. You do know the future. You do know the plans that you have for your people. You do know what and where you are taking us. And so we trust you, and we ask you to guide us, and we ask you to make us humble and to not attempt to step out of line and not to attempt to grab the wheel, to not attempt to take control. Help us to do that, we pray. And we prayed in Jesus' name. Amen. The Apostle James says, come now. He starts this little last subsection in this chapter with, it's almost like he's snapping his fingers at us. Come now. You say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Now there are, in 2019, now the different generations I'm sure have seen variations of this sinful attitude, but in our day, in our age, in the United States, there are essentially two groups of people that act and talk and think like this. The first group is a secular, humanistic group that would suggest that people control their own destiny and that you can make your own way, that you can autonomously build your life however you like it. That's one group. But it's a humanistic worldview, and it's a prideful worldview. The second group that I encounter, at least, that operates much like this are in pseudo-Christian circles. And I want to be careful because I'm not sure some of these groups fall into a formal category of a cult. I think there are strong categories that and boundaries that surround the kingdom of the cults. You know, denying the divinity of Jesus Christ, denying the Trinity, denying the inerrancy of Scripture, denying the virgin birth. Some of these groups do not fall technically in a formal sense into a cult category. So I don't know what to call them. Heterodox, pseudo-Christian. They have a lot of formality that is orthodox, but they would fall into a broad category known as the prosperity gospel. And then there are variant groups within that kind of larger subgroup. There is the name it and claim it. And I can say without a doubt that the name it and claim it bunch violate this passage of Scripture. They violate it directly. I mean, this is some bizarre stuff that somehow God lives for our glory, that God somehow lives to please us, that God lives to fulfill our will and our desires. And that whatever we put our mind to, whatever direction we decide to go in, we can declare that there will be success, and there will be life, and there will be health, and there will be this, and we will accomplish that. I truly do not understand how anybody in the prosperity gospel, especially in the name it and claim it circles, could ever believe and teach what they believe and teach and then read James chapter 4 verses 13 through 17. I honestly don't understand. Now, I can get my head around how a non-Christian could approach life through an arrogance like so many non-Christians do, atheistic or agnostic people who believe that they can build their own life and make their own way. I can understand in my head how they could have such a naturalistic view. But the name it and claim it bunch, the prosperity gospel bunch, absolutely, okay, I don't know how else to say it, flagrantly disobey and contradict James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17 with their teaching. Those are the two groups that live in an attempt to live in a way, I should say, they attempt to live in a way that puts themselves in the driver's seat. Both of those groups, both of those philosophies attempt to live life as if they're driving, as if they're the captain, as if they are setting the agenda for their life as they go forward. And to both of those groups, the Apostle James is saying, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. That's who he's talking to. Those of you that make plans, notice the plan making, today or tomorrow. So there's a time frame here. Today or tomorrow we're going to go. There's a plan of action. We are going to pack up and we are going to go to such and such a town. They have a destiny. Or not a destiny, a destination. And they're going to spend a year there, they say. We'll spend a year there and trade and make a profit. They're making all of these plans without anything, any type or any sort of consideration for God in their thinking. Nowhere do you read about them saying anything about the Lord. Come now, those of you who talk like this. Verse 14, he says, you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. You do not know tomorrow. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. On what basis do you have to think of your accomplishments thus far as if somehow you have done those things and accomplished those tasks and have crossed those thresholds autonomously? By what authority do you think you've done that? And by what authority do you think that you have to determine where you're going and where you're going to end up and how it's going to turn out? He says, what is your life? He's asking us, who do we think we are when we see the world in a way that discounts the influence and the providence and the grace of God, the eminence of God? How many people, how many of you listening to this right now are living life acknowledging there's probably a God up there, but he's leaving us alone to figure this out ourselves? And I'm going to make my own way, and I'm going to make my own kingdom, and I'm going to accomplish my own tasks, and God is not involved. Do you think like that? Do you operate like that? How many people go to church on a regular basis even and seem to think that that's their time with God, that they acknowledge God, and that they go the rest of their week on their own, making their own way? My friends, you had better understand two things in this life as you go through it, or it will never make sense. Number one, God is sovereign. He is sovereign over the affairs of all things at all times. He knows the past like he knows the present, And he knows the future just like he knows the past and the present. To him, he sees it all at once. He is sovereign over all of it. That's the first thing you need to understand. And the second thing you need to understand is you're not. You're not. I'm not. There is only one sovereign God. And the Apostle James is asking us, who are we? What is your life, he says? What are you made of? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. It's like in the morning. The fog can be so bad in the morning if you've ever had to drive in it. So it looks so real. It looks permanent. It's not moving. It's not really swirling. It's just hanging there. And it looks like it's been there forever. It permeates everything. And yet by the time the sun begins to beat down on that mist, it is gone. And it is so gone that it's like it never existed. It totally evaporates. It's here for a moment and it's gone. It is totally gone. And that mist, that fog, that smoke is probably another way that word in the Greek could even actually be translated. That mist, that fog, that haze is real, and then it has no ability to maintain its own existence. It evaporates apart from any of its own decision making. It has nothing to do with how long it's going to last. He says, you do not know what tomorrow will bring. God does. God does. How are you going to be a self-made person or determine your own path when you do not know what tomorrow will bring? You are, he says, what's your life? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, he says, you ought to say, the Christian thing to say is, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. If the Lord wills. You know, as I began this podcast, I made the comment that after I'm done recording this, editing it, uploading it, scheduling it, I'm gonna go to Taco Bell. Nowhere is the Apostle James suggesting that we have to constantly, ritualistically say the phrase, if the Lord wills. I mean, you would have to say, if the Lord wills, almost every minute on the minute, every hour on the hour, almost anything you said, you would have to preface, if the Lord wills. And even if you attempted to talk like that, you could very easily fall into ritualistic habits and it lose its effect. Now, there is a place to say things like, Lord willing, I say that, I do say that, many of you say that, Lord willing, we're going to pay this off. Lord willing, we're going on vacation. Lord willing, my wife, for example, as I'm recording this, my wife is pregnant. We found out it's going to be a girl. Lord willing, the pregnancy will go well, and Lord willing, the birth will go well, and Lord willing, the child will grow strong and come to faith in Jesus Christ, and Lord willing, my daughter will meet a godly man and get married and have babies and so forth. Lord willing, Lord willing, Lord willing. There is a point and a place to say that. But the point that the Apostle James is driving at is not the ritualistic repeating of it, because you can say a phrase like Lord willing or if the Lord wills so many times that it loses its impact. Here's the point. He is referring to an attitude. An attitude in life. If the Lord wills, we'll live and do this or do that. That is the Christian worldview. I want you to notice, now, this week and next week on New Testament chronology, we're going to be touching on issues of economics. The Bible deals with economics. We're going to spend much more time on Christian economics, biblical economics, next week as we get into James chapter 5. But I do want to mention something here. Notice that the Apostle James does not challenge the ethical nature of business. He does not challenge the ethical nature of free trade. He does not challenge the ethical nature of making money and of making profits, nor does he challenge the ethical nature of seeking to do that. That's not his problem with those who say that they're going to go into, or Lord willing, that they would go to such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. His problem is not in their making plans. He doesn't criticize making plans. He does not criticize the desire to do business and to make money and to make profits and to come home with more than what you left with. I think that is a critical point to make, especially in this day and age, with the alarming rise of socialistic Marxism in the United States. Marxism is pure evil, and it is unbiblical philosophically, and it is catastrophic every time it's ever tried. People die whenever they try Marxism, and yet we have got some of the most foolish people in the whole country in Congress now, and some of them running for president, wanting to do that. It's unbiblical. It doesn't matter what party you're in, it is unbiblical. Making money, making profits, having a business strategy, having a business plan, none of that is the problem here. James addresses none of it. The problem that James is addressing is leaving God out of the equation. Do you see that? The problem is thinking you're going to go off and do this without God and without His hand and without His blessing and without providence. You know, a few years ago, at the time he wasn't President Obama created a tremendous firestorm when he told small business people and all business people, business owners, entrepreneurs, he said, you didn't build that. You didn't do that. Someone else did that for you. And some of you are going to get mad at me. There's actually some truth to that. However, the one he is giving credit to for, quote, doing that is government. Every Marxist wants to replace God with government. It's not the providence of God, it's government. It's not the blessing of God, it's government. It's not the blessing of God, it's government. If you have seen a business built by your leadership, you cannot simply take the credit for it. As far as that goes, President Obama was right. The problem with what he said was who should take the credit for it. It's not the collective. It's not the government that should take the credit and get the glory for it. And I'm speaking to you as a fellow small business owner. I have employees. I know what it means to wonder how we're going to make payroll if we don't see revenues pick up. That's stress, pal. I know. I'm there. I'm with you. But whenever there is profit, none of us can say, I did this on my own. God has been good to you, God has been good to me, and God puts us in the positions that we need to be in order to conduct business. God providentially makes connections that we would not, under ordinary circumstances, have been able to make. I mean, for crying out loud, if you're in the United States doing business, you're in the United States because God saw to it that you would be in the United States, to live in a nation where there is a somewhat free market. I say somewhat free market. You could have been just as easily born in North Korea. But God said, no, not you. That's God's blessing in your life. God gave you the brains in your head. God gave you the imagination. God gave you the drive. God gave you the dream. God gave you the parents, good or bad, that He used to shape you. On and on and on. The problem is not entrepreneurship. The problem is not going for profits and for profitability. The problem where it becomes unchristian is when we divorce all of it from God. And we boast in it. And we think, I've done this all by myself. And you do not give God the glory. God deserves the glory when we are profitable, when we are successful. We must not ever boast in the work that He does. That's the problem. That's the problem the Apostle James is addressing. The problem is the boasting as if we're not missed, as if we're not here and gone. The problem is that we're not either formally saying or looking through life through the lens of if the Lord wills. If the Lord wills, I will have success. If the Lord wills, I'll live to an old age and see my grandchildren grow up. If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or do that. I want to encourage you to live life, my loved ones. I want to encourage you to live life in light of the sovereign hand of God. Humble yourselves under His mighty hand. It says, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. It's evil. Living life thinking that we are self-made people. Living life without giving God the glory for our successes. Living life thinking that we are going to determine our own way and that we're the captain of our own ship and that our destiny hinges on who we are. Living life like that is a form and type of boasting. You may not say it out loud, but if that is your disposition in your heart, it is boasting and it is evil. All such boasting is evil. I want you to notice how he says all such boasting is evil. Notice he doesn't say all boasting is evil. There is a type of boasting which boasts in humility. There is a kind of boasting in life that deflects glory from self and reflects it, or it reflects the glory of God. The Apostle Paul, on a couple occasions, commands us, both by instruction and by example, what godly boasting is, and the type of boasting that is not evil. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 30, he says, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. If I'm going to boast, I'm going to make sure everyone knows how frail I am. If I'm going to talk about myself, if people want to know about me, they're going to know how bad I need grace. They're going to find out how bad I need Jesus. Every day I need Him. So if I'm going to boast and if I'm going to talk about myself, he says, that's what they're going to hear about. Not my great exploits, not these great victories that I'm going to take credit for. I'm not going to boast in my brains. I'm not going to boast in my good looks. I'm not going to boast about my youth. I'm not going to boast about my accomplishments. I will boast in my weakness. I will tell you about how much God has done for me. That is the Christian worldview. That's the Christian worldview. Later on in that same book, next chapter, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. You remember he was praying about a thorn in his flesh. He prayed 3 times that the Lord would take it from him. And Jesus said to him, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, this is Paul's words, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness. If people want to know about me, and if they come to me asking me about success, about making money, people come to me if they want to know about, or perhaps they're wanting mentorship. I've had that happen. Young guys wanting to learn how to preach, minister. Folks wanting to know, have some sales. I've got a sales background as well, and entrepreneurship. When they come to you and they say, teach me, I want to do what you're doing. Do you boast in your strategies? Do you boast in your strengths? Do you try to make them disciples of you? Or do you do as the Apostle Paul told us to do, by example? He says, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness. Do you point them to Jesus? Let me tell you about what God has done for me. I could not have built what I've built unless God strengthened me, unless God motivated me, unless God moved me, unless God put so-and-so in my life, unless this or that hadn't happened providentially, I would not be where I am. Do people walk away from you thinking about how great you are? Or do they walk away thinking about how great Jesus is? All such boasting about what I'll do and what I have done, apart from bringing glory to Jesus, self-righteous boasting. All of it, he says, the Apostle James, back in James 4. All such boasting is evil. It's evil. God's will for us as we live this life is to bring Him glory in the hard times and in the good times, when we have little and when we have abundance. God is to receive the glory. And you can't give Him the glory when you think you're going to share it with Him. You can't give Him the glory when you're boasting about what you've done and what you're going to do. And so when you're living like that, you may be making money. You may have the nice house. You may have the success, the job title, the degree. But you won't have peace. The reason you won't have peace is because you're living life off mission. You're living a meaningless, vain life. There's no purpose to that. God doesn't have you here, Christian, to build your kingdom. God doesn't have you here, Christian, to exalt your name. You're here to build His kingdom, and you are here to exalt His name. Even in business. Even in business. Now he ends this chapter and this subsection in this chapter with verse 17, which could apply to essentially anything else in the whole Bible. It's this little addendum. He says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Now you could say that to any command, right? But James the Apostle puts it at the end of this subsection. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So here's what he's saying. Why is he putting that at the end of this subsection here, this sub portion of this chapter? He's saying, now I've told you. I just told you that this is evil. All such boasting, he says, is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do, what's the right thing to do in this context of what he's talking about? Living life in light of the sovereignty of God. Being quick to acknowledge that I cannot do anything apart from Christ, and that if the Lord wills, I'll do this and I'll do that. That's the right thing to do. That's the right approach to life. That's the right worldview. That approach and saying that phrase, if done with the right sincerity, brings glory to Jesus. See, the world doesn't operate like that. As I said, there's two groups that talk like this. One of them's worldly. So if you do have a measure of success, and you are able to go to such and such town and spend a year and trade there and make a profit, and they talk to you about it, you can say it was God's will. God's been good to me. God blessed me. You see how fast you're able to turn it to Him, the glory to Him, and off of you? That's the purpose and the meaning of your life. And that's the, quote, the right thing to do. So verse 17, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. There are all kinds of Christians listening to this podcast right now that go to work every day, and they do a good job, and they're good employees, and they're productive. They're maybe in sales, and they're profitable. They're leaders. Some of you are leaders at work, in business. And people recognize it. And they pat you on the back. And they give you Employee of the Month badge. And you never give God glory for it. You accept the praise. Every time. This is hard. Every time you're recognized at work, you know, nobody is saying you need to get up there and shout and holler like I do on these podcasts. Nobody's saying that. But every time you're recognized as a blessed individual, as a Daniel, every time that happens in the context of work and business and commerce is an opportunity for you to reflect on the glory and the grace and the mercy and the blessing of God in your life. Do you take that opportunity? Ever? Ever? Do you tell your boss when they congratulate you on a good job? Do you ever say anything about how God has been good to me or God's given me the gift to do whatever it is? Or do you take it? Do you take the glory? If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or do that. He's telling us that the Christian work ethic, the Christian business ethic, the Christian entrepreneurial spirit is to recognize the providential hand of God and to recognize and to praise and to glorify the blessing of God in our lives, which, if we're profitable, is because of that grace. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. It is possible for you to sin at work without cussing at anybody. It is possible for you to sin at work without you being gross, without you stealing, without you being violent. It is possible for you to sin without being perverted while you're at work and laughing at the dirty jokes. You can be a good boy, go to work, do a fantastic job, and be sinning as you do it, if you are willing to take the glory for your productivity and for your profitability and for your benefiting of that company. My loved ones, do as the Apostle James says to do. Give God the glory. Show him his due. Point people to Jesus. Do not accept the glory. Do not accept the glory when we're profitable, when we're beneficial, when we're successful. Always, at every opportunity that you're being given, always turn it back to him. Say, the Lord has willed this. God has put me in this position. I am so blessed to have accomplished this. And if we're going to continue to be blessed, if we're going to continue to be profitable, it'll be because of God's willingness to continue to bless us. Give him all the praise and glory.
There is a king, and he rules over all of this land. Even mountains obey his command. He is awesome and powerful. Spoke into the dark, and he called every star into place. In his voice every symphony played. Dawn of the universe. He called my name, wiped away my shame. You, my debt is paid. Now I'm alive in you. Jesus, our voices cry. I see a king, a love that I can't comprehend. Nails through his feet and his hands, on Calvary crucified.